Here's what keeps me up at night. We've got smartphones that recognize our faces, cars that drive themselves, rovers on Mars, and we've mapped the entire human genome. Technologically, we're living in the future. But turn on the news or honestly, just scroll through social media and you'll see the same patterns of violence, inequality, and competition that have existed for millennia. Worse than that, the systems we built to protect us are themselves doing violence. Children torn from their parents at the border, families destroyed by deportation, communities terrorized by raids, bodies locked in cages we call detention centers. So what gives? Have we actually evolved beyond violent tendencies? Or have we just gotten better at hiding them behind bureaucracy and policy? That question led me to my thesis. Humans haven't evolved beyond violent tendencies, but we've developed sophisticated systems to constrain and redirect violence rather than eliminate it. The problem is, these constraining systems are themselves often violent in how they operate. We've traded one form of violence for another and called it progress. To explore this question, I conducted an anonymous online survey with 39 college-aged respondents over 2 weeks in November. I wanted to understand how our generation perceives violence, media's role in desensitizing us, and what solutions people see. The results revealed something powerful. First, there was overwhelming consensus. 74% of respondents agreed that media exposure desensitizes us to violence. We all know it's happening to us. We can feel ourselves becoming numb, but here's the finding that surprised me and honestly gave me hope. The people who had personally experienced violence, whether physical, verbal, or institutional, were actually more optimistic about human nature than those who hadn't experienced violence. That seems backward, right? You'd think witnessing or experiencing violence would make you pessimistic about humanity, but it makes sense when you think about it. People who've experienced violence understand its contextual nature. They know violence isn't inevitable or hardwired. It emerges from specific circumstances that could be changed. And they've seen the human face behind the violence. They understand the cycle. And most importantly, they've seen the moments where it could have gone differently. They know the choice points. And despite everything, despite the fear, despite the trauma, 42% of respondents identified better communication and dialogue as the primary solution. Despite awareness of media desensitization and systemic contradictions, the most common response was that we need to talk to each other better, listen, and try to understand. Let's start with what seems like good news, though it won't feel good for long. According to Pew Research Center's analysis of FBI and Bureau of Justice statistics data, violent crime rates in the United States have fallen dramatically, between 49% and 71% from 1993 to 2022, depending on which dataset you use. That's a massive decline. We're living in what statisticians call the safest era in human history. So why doesn't it feel that way? Why do I feel scared walking home at night? Why do my friends talk about buying guns? Why does my mom text me every time there's news about a shooting? Because perception doesn't match reality, and that gap is being deliberately widened by people who profit from our fear. The same Pew poll found that 60% of Americans consistently believe crime is increasing nationally, despite the actual decline in violence. This isn't just ignorance, it's manipulation. Journalist Neil Strauss investigated this phenomenon and found that media companies, politicians, and corporations deliberately cultivate fear because fear is profitable. As Strauss puts it, we're living in the most fear-mongering time in human history, even as actual violence decreases. The 24-hour news cycle needs content. Social media algorithms need engagement. Politicians need bogeymen. So they give us an endless stream of violence, real and imagined, until we can't tell the difference anymore. This manufactured fear has real, measurable consequences on our brains and our capacity for empathy. My survey data shows that 74% of respondents agree or strongly agree that media exposure desensitizes us to violence, with an average score of 4.21 out of 5.0. This wasn't controversial. Everyone knows it's happening to us. Across age groups, education levels, and personal experiences with violence, people recognized that constant exposure to violent imagery and narratives was changing how they process suffering. We're becoming numb. When I see another video of police violence, another school shooting, another migrant child crying at the border, I feel it for maybe 30 seconds before I have to keep scrolling because otherwise the weight of it would crush me. That's desensitization. That's what they've done to us. The scholarly literature on human violence, cooperation, and societal contradictions comes from multiple disciplines, each revealing a different facet of how we've built systems that perpetuate the very harms they claim to prevent. Let me walk through what evolutionary psychologists, neuroscientists, political economists, psychiatrists, and media researchers have discovered about whether humans can evolve beyond violent tendencies and what it costs us when we don't. And then there's ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The words sound so bureaucratic, so administrative, like we're just processing paperwork. But what we're really doing is terrorizing families and traumatizing children on a scale that psychiatrists are calling a mental health crisis. Let me tell you about Ana, a composite case presented by Dr. Lisa Fortuna and Dr. Kevin Gutierrez in their report on immigration policy and child mental health. Ana is 8 years old. She's a U.S. citizen. Her mother is undocumented. Ana wakes up every morning terrified that today will be the day ICE comes. She stopped going to school regularly because she's afraid that if she leaves, her mother will be gone when she gets back. She started wetting the bed again. She has nightmares. She checks the locks on the doors obsessively. She's 8 years old. Ana isn't unique. She's one of approximately 4 million U.S. citizen children who have an undocumented parent, which means roughly 1 in 12 U.S. children risk losing a loved one to deportation. Think about that number. 1 in 12 children living with the chronic fear that their family could be torn apart at any moment. The Society for Research in Child Development identifies interaction. So here's what all this research taught me, connecting back to my field findings. We're not hardwired for violence. Evolutionary psychologists Paul Gilbert and Gibran Basran argue that humans evolved with the capacity for both pro-social and anti-social competitive strategies. Violence isn't in our DNA, it's context dependent. The environment determines which behaviors emerge. That should be hopeful, but it's actually terrifying because it means we're actively choosing to build environments that bring out the worst in us. Political economist Helen Milner shows how capitalism generates economic inequality that contradicts democratic principles. We built systems that reward selfishness and punish generosity. But here's where my field research and the scholarly literature converge into something hopeful. Violence is contextual, not inevitable. My respondents who experience violence understand this viscerally. They know it could have gone differently. Historian Rutger Bregman argues in Humankind that much of what we believe about human savagery comes from flawed research. Maybe we're not as bad as we've been told, and that 42% who believe in better communication, they're onto something profound. Communication isn't just about talking nicely, it's about creating shared understanding, building coalitions across difference, and coordinating collective action to change institutions. That's what evolutionary research shows scales up human cooperation. Let me restate my thesis with what I've learned. Humans haven't evolved beyond violent tendencies, but we've created systems that sometimes successfully constrain violence. The problem is that these systems are themselves often violent. We've traded interpersonal violence for structural violence, and that's not progress. But recognizing these contradictions doesn't mean giving up. We exist in tension between our capacities for violence and cooperation. The side that wins depends on the choices we make about institutions and communication. We can choose to keep building systems that traumatize children like Ana, that separate families, that perpetuate inequality, or we can choose to build societies where cooperation genuinely outweighs competition, where stated values match actual behaviors, where violence becomes the exception rather than a hidden norm we've learned to scroll past. Maybe honesty, painful as it is the first step toward something better. That's what my respondents with their call for better communication were trying to tell me all along. Thank you.